As I've said, we're going to spend a whole subject on project scope, and a lot of the things, out of all the NTIS requirements, as I said earlier on, the heaviest assessment or the heaviest topics you must prove are actually in HR, which is why we've spent this number of weeks on it. But one of the last things you need to do is actually start taking some of that information and putting it into your scope document. So that's why we're covering this now. So the objectives from this particular session are for you to understand in very simple terms what a scope document does without us going into the whole topic, and to understand what you've got to do from an assessment point of view to finish off the HR subject. The scope subject is Chapter 5, and on page 104 you will see a very simple diagram, simple as in anything's ever simple in here. And they talk about all this wonderful things that we put into it, and where you get it from and all the rest of it. Half of those things you've already done because you've already done it when you've considered the stakeholders, when you've done your breakdown structure. So all we're going to do is take those and put them in the scope document, which is not hard. So scope document is the process of developing and documenting detailed description of the project or the product, depending on what it is that you're doing, whether your project is product-based or process-based. So basically the scope document is often the first document that you present to your stakeholders, which gives you a summary and an overview of what you're going to do or what you intend to do. Quite often the scope document is the one that you present to management for approval for you to go ahead and do something. Or for them to give you actually put an estimate of budget and they'll say, okay, yes, go and do that, and then we'll give you some more money or whatever it may be. So as I say, the scope is the first document that a lot of you might actually recognise all the stakeholders, but they might not even know they're going to be involved because they don't know anything about it until they get the scope document. So you'll remember when we started talking about stakeholders, we went through this process of looking at who the stakeholders were, identifying them through discussion, recognition, industry forums, feedback, talking to people, whoever it may be. Then you by their needs and requirements. Do you remember this one? This is the same slide for the first week or so. Yeah. Then we went through some project activities. You meet what they want them to do. And so stakeholders are actually, as I said, without stakeholders, you don't have a project in the first place. Okay, so that's why it's important to actually understand all of them and know how you've got to communicate with them. When we get to the communication subject, who you communicate with, when you do it, how you do it, why you do it, what you're telling them, what training needs analysis you need to do, what training you need to give them, all of those things will come into play. If you don't have the right list of stakeholders, then the whole thing just turns to custard. The reason I'm repeating this is the information that you're going to put into the scope document as the last part of your HR topic assessment item. Okay, so the normal scope content is you going through the what, who, how, when, where, why scenario. So this summary, the project plan goes from end to end. It gives you all the detail of everything. So if somebody wants to read War and Peace, they can. If they only want a summary and they want to say, okay, who's going to do it, what you're going to do, what benefits, what are the assumptions, how much is it going to cost me, and who's going to do it, that's in the scope document. Okay, so it's like a subset, it's a summary of the whole thing. Okay, so when we're talking about it, it's what you're going to do in the project, whatever it may be, who's going to be involved, how much it's going to cost. And the reason why I didn't do the scope subject first was because you're not going to know what the hell to put in it. You know, we haven't done the budget or the cost management subject. We haven't done the risk management subject. We haven't done all of those things. So how can you properly do the scope until we have? So now that you've done some of the things, you've gone through HR, you've got your stakeholders and a few other things, you can put some of that content into the template. I'm not expecting you to do the whole thing. I want you to take what you've already done and do something with it. Make sense? So progressively, we'll actually build the scope where we'll go through all these different subjects.
Excuse me, did you include the timeline in this as well? Or is that
yes, you actually don't include the whole timeline, but you actually put milestones and a general summary of when you would expect things to get done.
Okay.
If we wanted to and had the time, if we finished the scope document, would that help us with the next subjects that we're going to be covering?
You'll probably find that you need to change it. You can, happy to, like Eric's already given years and I've got on a couple, but and that's all good, but be prepared to change or add things to it because everyone's scope template or whatever is different.
But then you could just do version control.
Yes, that's right. So I'm not going to be looking at anything other than the specific content I'm asking you for now. So last week when somebody said, oh, what do we do with position descriptions, what do we do with scope? I said, don't even consider that now because I'm not going to be able to go through and evaluate what everyone's doing. I just want, at that stage, I want the work breakdown structure, the stakeholders, the resources allocated, blah, blah, that's it. So now what I'm asking for is a complete position description and the scope document with your stakeholders included, which I'll go through in a moment. Okay, but just in principle, you're okay with what the scope is. It's a summary document. It means that somebody who's never heard of your project can actually read that and understand in principle what you're going to do and who's going to be impacted and as I say, the how, who, when, why, what, wherefore.
What's exclusions?
Exclusions are things that you're not going to do. Now, in a scope, if you do not identify what you're not going to do, then the assumption is that you're going to do it. So if you can imagine, one of the projects I worked in was a takeover, and they had gone through all the assets that will be taken over from one company to another. They did not exclude software. So when one company took over the other company, the presumption was that all the software that that company owned was part of the asset and that they would get that as well, and that was a load of money. So when you're doing, it's a bit different for your project, but if you're doing a business project, for example, what you're doing with, reorganising your car parks across the whole of your organisation, you may need to exclude disabled car parking. You may need to specifically state the assumptions are that all car parks will be undercover. There will be no open-air car parks. You may need to state that you're not going to cater for the lazy axle, eight-wheeler, blah, blah vehicle. So you need to put, this is actually part of putting boundaries around what you are going to include and what you're not. When you're doing a subdivision, the assumption an assumption may be that you already own land. Or an exclusion might be that we're not going to cater for the demolition of rock. If you're actually going to level a block to be able to build, you're saying I'm not going to budget for rock because that's something which I can't plan for. I've got no idea how much it will cost and I don't know what's under the dirt anyway. So so the exclusion is actually saying we are not going to cover this particular thing. In a business-based project, it is really important. It's one of the most important things you can include because if you don't, then people will assume that anything they think is included within it is fair game. And what the exclusions help you do is manage your contract variations. It actually helps you manage. Remember we talked about out-of-scope items and change requests, corrective actions, etc. Your exclusions actually help you manage those things. You say, okay, I clearly told you that we were not going to develop a website that would include customers organising their own accommodation. So that's the sort of thing you actually have. So you think of all the things you're going to do, and you've got to try and consider the things you're not going to do.
So this content is setting you up for your contract preparation?
Yeah, it's one of the, and the thing is we haven't got into any of that, which is why we're not worrying about it. I'm just talking about scopes in general at the moment. That the scope actually gives you the summary of all the boundaries that you're going to put in place in the bigger document. And then there's the etc. Because there's always more. Okay, for completion of this HR subject, you will take either the scope document that I've given you, or you will take one of your own. You will include the full list of stakeholders. And this actually represents what you've already got in your stakeholder register, and don't be afraid to add more. But if you add it to your scope, make sure you've added it to the work breakdown structure as well. Keep them clean and keep them aligned. And this, the last point is talking about what I said about all the stakeholders, and the scope document will prompt you for this.
There's a PDF file online, and I did read that. And Wade mentions that the scope ideally should be pages long.
And you see
like
what's
a few pages long, otherwise it's insufficient in detail.
It's horses for courses depending on the project.
Right.
Normally the scopes that I do are usually 2 to 3 pages depending on the complexity of the project. But when you consider you're going to write, you're going to include the stakeholders, you're going to have some information about the budget, you're going to put a summary of the timeline in there, you're going to have you're going to have some information about summary of risk and that sort of thing. Anything under 2 pages, you're going to have headings.